Well, hello again. It's David Willey, the curator from the Tank Museum for, I think this is about our 12th question and answer session, and evidently still not at the Tank Museum. Those of you know all the format. I answer some questions that people have sent in, whether it's on the comments or by email, and try and give you some answers, and at the same time show you some of the things that we've got in our online shop, which is still open and is our only source of income at the moment, which is why thank you so much for those of you who've been buying things. We're trying to push these items because that helps us keep going through these rather difficult times. So on with the questions. So I'm going to, and apologies, last week I missed out one or two or didn't get my notes in order. I've tried to put them in a bit better order, but they're still all over the place, so bear with us. And the other thing, sorry for those of you who might be new to this, I also have my dog with me here, who's sitting at the moment behind the camera chewing his ball, but at some moment fairly shortly he's bound to come over or decide he wants to take part in all this, in which case I've got to throw the ball for him. And that's just par for the course. But right, let's get on with things. Is it Spam Vacuum asks the question, how was armour plate specified, or the specification for armour plate arrived at and then tested? Well, as you can imagine, this is one of those topics that basically through time that specification has changed. But if you think about it in a sort of broader sense, what they're trying to do, certainly in the way of tanks, is to create a level of protection on that vehicle to deal with what they think will be the main anti-tank weapon that they'll be going up against. Now, this is why, again, when we look back, we have the advantage of looking back, and so often people say, well, that wasn't enough, was it? Look at when the tank was being built or when it was going into service, and quite often the levels of armour protection they are trying to deal with, what they put on that tank was very adequate for what they thought the issues were and the role of that tank was going to be. Now, we all know, again, with that benefit of hindsight, in the Second World War, the gun and armour race just goes off the scale, as it were. So very quickly we go through this massive increase in the armament on a vehicle, and that in turn leads to further armour protection being put on vehicles in the Second World War. But if you go back to the 20s and 30s, the main thing they were trying to be proof against initially was machine gun fire, because that's what they thought the tank was going to be there to try and suppress machine gun fire, because that had been the problem in the First World War. How do we get the infantry to advance against static positions with machine guns in? We need something to accompany them forward, and that's where the armour plate was going to be necessary, and as long as you were proof against machine gun fire, fine. Then by the end of the 30s, as they're realising the standard anti-tank guns of your potential oppositions, that tends to then be the next level of what's being specified. And of course, by the time so many of these tanks come into production, this idea that, you know, that well, why don't they know something bigger is coming, why don't they add more armour plate? When you think about it all the time, is every time you're adding more armour protection, you are getting to that point again where you're adding weight and wearing out the tank quicker, so you tend to only go for what you think is necessary. And, you know, as we all know as well, the conclusion is in the end that whatever armour protection you put on, you're very unlikely to be proof against everything that's out there. So here's another conundrum. We tend to always look at the main anti-tank gun, or the main threat, or not even the main one, quite often the exceptional. So for example, you know, an 88mm gunned Tiger as being the threat. Sorry, it's been raining around here earlier today. When in actual fact, and let me throw the ball for the dog. Finn, come back here and drop the ball. Drop it. Thank you. Yeah, well, in actual fact, the vast majority of the time, that vehicle won't be coming up against the ultimate threat. It'll be coming up against something else, you see. And that is where, again, so we might have that position where a tank that we don't think has got that much armour protection on is actually effective 95% of the time in the engagements or up against the threat it's going against. It's only those small percentage of times where it might bump into something with that superior firepower that can penetrate its armour. So you see this dilemma when we're judging these things all the time. Actually, you can have a successful tank, but it's not necessarily got the thickest armour or top of the range or be proof against anything. So those things are things to bear into mind. And of course that all changes after the war as well, when we've got other types of weapon systems coming along. But you're never going to be proof against everything. They'll always have a bigger bomb. They're always coming up with new things. So everyone's always this guns armour race, and this with new technologies as well coming along. How are we going to protect ourselves in the future? In terms of the actual, one of the part of the question was then testing, this idea of that word proof, and that goes back to medieval times. What most armour, once it's been produced, there is normally some form of a system where someone comes and tries it. So whether that was early days, firing a bow and arrow at it, using a sword, will it take a sword blow? Again, you'll see Civil War, English Civil War uniforms, you see all the breastplates, everyone says, oh look, someone's taken a pot shot at it because there's a dent in it. Actually, they are being the proof mark. So in other words, a pistol was taken with a certain amount of powder, given amount, fired from a known distance, and that would be proofing that plate, because basically if the ball doesn't penetrate the plate, it's met its proof. So in other words, it's safe to go. And of course sometimes, and then you're back into this period where, again, if you're doing things like armour plate later, where that's why a batch number is important, and every now and again there'll be a random or a certain percentage is taken away to be tested against what it's thought to be, it should be proof against. And again, that whole history of armour and what goes into it, why some malleable armours are preferred to face hardened in different times, and some types of armour protection are going to be better against certain types of projectile types. So this is another whole massive subject area. But that idea about, for tanks, it's a classic example where why didn't they just put thicker armour? A millimetre on a main battle tank of steel adds a ton in weight. So every time you're adding a millimetre of steel armour, another ton goes on. And as we know, that means it's going to make you heavier, it's going to cause you more issues and everything. So finding that right compromise of the amount of armour is quite a tricky one. Zephyr asks the question, was HESH discovered to be a good anti-tank round by accident or what? And this was actually a question I forgot to answer last week. HESH is an interesting one because HESH, high explosive squash head. It's a type of round that came into service just after the Second World War, and the idea behind it is that a HESH round, if you're firing at a tank or an armoured vehicle, what it is, it's a plastic explosive within the casing of the shell. The shell is much thinner than a normal high explosive round. So a high explosive round, it lands, it's detonated, a trigger mechanism with that detonation causes the explosive inside to blast out, and the metal casing creates blast effect as it's going out and shreds and does all sorts of things, or knocks things down and does all sorts of damage with that metal shell and the blast effect from the explosive. Now with a HESH round, that metal of the shell is much thinner, and what happens is when the shell impacts the target, so if we think of the side of a tank or armour plate, it squashes, because the fuse is not at the front, it squashes, pancakes the phrase used, against the side of the vehicle, and a millisecond after this is happening, that's when the base fuse detonates the explosive, this plastic explosive that's been inside it that has pancaked out, and that creates a shock wave that runs through the metal of the tank or the armoured vehicle it's been fired against and cause what's called spalling, a scab to come off on the inside and cause damage inside the vehicle. Now HESH, and again it's a great story, this is a guy I wanted to bring in last time, which I'd written it all down but forgot to talk about. Sir Charles Denniston Burney is one of these, again, amazing characters. Probably you haven't heard of his name, or some of you might. The Burney gun comes out later in World War II. But he's one of these characters. He's born into an aristocratic family, goes off, joins the Navy. His father was an admiral. He has interests in engineering. He comes up with a paravane. which is one of those things you tow behind you and it helps detonates or clears mines. And in the First World War, he gets £350,000 from foreign governments paying the royalty on his, because he's the one who patents the Paravane. So he's a wealthy guy and he can afford to invest in some of his ideas. Now, he's later on, he gets involved with Barnes-Wallis. He's part of the team for the R100 airship, R101. And he's engaged with, that when you read about his life story, all these different people he's bumping into. Barnes-Wallis is working with Neville Shute, who goes on to be the author as well. He's part of that airship project. He does a car company, streamlined cars, all sorts of amazing things this guy does. But in the Second World War, he turns his attention, he's looking at explosives, and he comes up with the idea of the Hesh round. But initially, this is done as a bunker buster. In other words, it's done because of the blast effect, works on concrete as well. So this idea of taking out pillboxes, etc. Now, those Hesh rounds don't go into service in the First World War. But, and the question that led to this one, was also indicating, was it by accident they found it was good against armour? On the whole, most projectile systems you come up with, you might be designing it one thing, but as part of the course, you are going to test it against other things to see, because don't bother about firing this chaps at those type of targets, not worth it. And that's when they discover, of course, if they're doing this against armour, they're thinking, well, hang on a second, look at this great spalling that's going on inside, when something we thought of as a demolition round is actually fired at an armoured vehicle. And after World War II, that we developed the 165mm demolition gun that goes on Churchill tanks post-war, and then on the Churchill Avery, the Centurion Avery with the 165 demolition. So that's got that type of big Hesh round in it. For the British Army as well, they like the Hesh round. And back to, we've talked about it earlier, that's also one of the reasons they like the rifled barrel, because if you spin a Hesh round, that works better for it. What you don't want it to do, you don't want to spin it too far and too fast, so it goes relatively slowly through the air. If you watch it next to, if you've been to a firing range and you see when they fire Hesh, you kind of see this trajectory and the tracer on the back of it as it goes there. If they fire a fin round, armour piercing, fin stabilised, that thing's just like, it's just gone in a split second. Hesh you can kind of see going, because they don't want to fire it too fast. That if you hit the target too quickly, it doesn't have its full effect on it. But they do like spinning it. That has a positive effect, hence the British liked, because Hesh is very effective, hence they like the rifled round. And I know we've just put out our tank chat on Challenger 2. One of the things, if Challenger 3, whatever they're going to call it, comes along with the upgrade, if that all goes ahead in the way, we'll be saying goodbye to that rifle barrel and hello to a smoothbore, because everyone else is using smoothbore now, and there's other ways of dealing with vehicles in that, rather than just using the Hesh in the way we were. So we probably have high explosive there. But Denniston Burney, this guy who comes up with these things, another one of those, we talked earlier about that book we're selling in the shop, Mavericks, who come along and help design things, do things. And at the end of the war, he comes up with something called the Burney gun. It doesn't quite see service and is dropped quite quickly afterwards. But that idea, it goes on the Malkara rocket. So the anti-tank rocket, the idea of Hesh on the end there, quite often I think we all think it's going to be hollow charge. No, it's not. It's a Hesh round on the end of the Malkara there. So I think that's all I was going to say on him. And also, sorry, I just in my notes there, one of the other things it leads to, of course, is Hesh is being fired by the anti-tank, the towed anti-tank guns that Britain puts into service after the Second World War. Some of those last towed anti-tank guns, things like the Mobat and the Wombat, they're firing those Hesh rounds as well. Anyway, I hope that answers that one about Hesh, because it's one of those topics, again, ammunition types, back to, we just said about armour, what type of things is a threat against, how do you protect against Hesh? Well, actually, it's lost some of its effectiveness because of spaced armour, because, of course, that idea of a shockwave going through armour, first of all, it was spall lining, so there's ways you can capture that inside, and then with spaced armour, that detonation wave doesn't go through in the same manner, so it has less effect. So these are other sort of things. So back to what was that armour thickness, how was he going to proof it, what it was going to be about. These things all go hand in hand. And I'll throw the ball again. Drop it, Finn. Come here. Drop. There we go. And as well at the same time, I will have a slurp from my, as it's Friday, different one today. I have a, what have I got? I've got a Sherman Fury mug today. So I'll slurp my tea. Right, and on with the questions. Marcus Wardle, actually somebody else came back afterwards, I mentioned it last time, but they were asking where's that Churchill recovery tank? That's with REME, Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, their fantastic core museum, which is at RAF Lynham, the old RAF Lynham base. That's where, because of what's happened, is basically the Army, the Navy, Air Force have all decided to put its technical training together. That's based at RAF Lynham, so that's where that the museum moved to. And if you want to go and have a look at that, and I mentioned before as well, have a look at their website, have a look online. I know as well, you know, if you're interested in engineer variant vehicles, again, there's a great collection of engineer armour at the Royal Engineers Museum, which is at Chatham. So that's another one to go and have a look at there. They've got a fantastic collection there as well. Right, Tom asked a question, who started stripes on barrels? I had a quick look on this, and it's quite an old thing, putting a stripe around the barrel as a kill ring, as it were. And you'll see that occurring in, you know, propaganda, and everybody, they all love taking those photographs. I haven't found who started that, and I don't know if anyone else out there, you know, can you almost track back to where the earliest one is. Careful as well, because colour rings on barrels aren't always kill rings. So some units, I know the American Army at one point on their tanks, they did, it was a differentiation, red, white and blue, depending on what section you were in as part of that tank unit. And again, that's another thing about why you need this sort of recognition. It's so you're not yelling over the radio trying to contact someone and realising actually it's completely the wrong tank. That gives you a little bit of being able to narrow that down, as it were, on what section they're in. There he goes again. Right, let's carry on with some of the other questions that we've been sent in. Jeff in Australia, thanks very much. You've become a patron. Well done. Books on radios and wireless in armoured vehicles. What have we got out there? I've had a look, and again, if any of you know better, please do put this in the comments. One of the things is there's less I know of written on radios and wireless in armoured vehicles. There's more general subjects ones, and they tend to be country specific. So for example, in Britain, if you want to know all about radios in general for the armed forces, there's a fantastic book called Wireless for the Warrior. If you can find a copy, it's a big thick thing, quite hard to get hold of. And I know there's one on German radios. They tend to be country specific. There'll be something in there, like a chapter in how they adapted, for example, the 19 set becomes, you know, the tank version sort of thing. But I'd be really grateful if anyone else knows better books on radio systems. They tend to have a small section in it on the more general books, but not a whole book on that one topic. So that's a bit of a trickier one there. And Charles Flint, very kindly as well, I was saying about if you bought some of the books from the shop. Come here, Finn. If you enjoy them, you know, do come back and tell us what you think about them. And he's put a review here. Charles Flint read that Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare book. I was saying all about these, not dirty tricks, but all the things that Churchill was trying to get people to do before D-Day and even after D-Day, actually, as well. And he says here, Charles Flint says, can't recommend it highly enough. Really enjoyed that. So thank you for coming back. Which, again, of course, gives me a bit of an excuse to talk about books again. I know a couple of people I mentioned last time that we've got this cracker here that's come out on the Vickers machine gun as one of those Haynes series. And I've got myself a copy of this because I really liked it, Martin Pegler. That one, and I mention the fact because there is a superb book by Collector's Grade Edition, huge, great big tome, and of course you all go out there and look for it and everything, and goodness me, on Amazon at the moment, £960. But the good news I saw was, well, number one is buy that one, because there you go, at whatever the price is. I can't remember what we got on this one, but go on the website, they're all, you know, knockdown prices. That one is really, really good on the Vickers. If you are insistent to have that huge, great volume, which is, I've got my own copy, and I didn't want to bring it out because it's almost look like you're bragging when I looked at the price of this thing. number one, does anyone ever pay those prices on Amazon, like for that sort of money for a book? And number two, the really good news that thank you, someone's come back and said that actually they are going to be reprinting that Grand Old Lady of No Man's Land book. So I think sometimes with these ones, when they've got the permissions, they do a subscription thing. So everyone, if they sign up and put a bit of money up front, then it's worthwhile printing. But it's something we're looking into with some of the titles we own or would love to reprint. It's not simple, it's not that easy. And of course, there's always that risk there. So if you're the lucky person that's managing to try and sell yours for 960 quid, I'd be fascinated if you had managed to do it. But meanwhile, if you're not going to pay that sort of money, or even when it does come out, again, it's probably a fairly sizable one, I'd recommend getting your Vickers Haynes manual, because that kind of fits the bill. Yeah, all right. Sorry, and the dog's getting bored again. Come here, Finn, bring it to me. I think this is a cue for if I start going off track and going on a bit too long. So another one's Haynes manuals as well. We got another one. I know you've seen some of these ones before, but there's a U-boat one came in, and another new one by Jonathan Faulkner, who's the editor of the series, on RAF Bomber Command. And those of you, again, I know, thank you very much, you've been coming back with comments on these. I'm just going to read you a quote on this one, because sometimes, where you think, is it worth spending $8.99 on the book for this one quote? Listen to this. This is Don Charwood, who was a Lancaster navigator from 42 to 43. Life on the squadron was seldom far from fantasy. We might at 8 be in a chair beside a fire, but at 10 in an empty world above a floor of cloud. Or at 8 walking in Barnletby with a girl whose nearness denied all possibility of sudden death at 12. What a quote, what a thing. Anyway, I'd recommend again these very, very good series there. I was also, as well, sorry, just answering some questions that were going to come up. Somebody else asked a question when I mentioned these volumes. I've got my own ones there, Der Tiger before. They're in English, that's the thing. It's all in English. It's just the title there saying The Tiger in German. And actually, I was fascinated to see I've got 2 volumes, volume 1, volume 2, but there is now volume 3. So we've got all 3 volumes in the shop. If you like, if you're a bit of a Tiger fan, again, you like the quality images. I've talked about this before. When is it worth spending a bit extra and getting those really nice, good quality prints with all that detailing, especially if you're a model maker? And I'll talk about model makers in a moment, a little while time to come. The other one was just reminding you that, again, if you don't want to buy those collected, like all the British tanks, etc., they've been put together in the Osprey series, we've still got the original single volume ones here. So I just bought one there, Cruiser and Covenanter, David Fletcher, our David Fletcher, of course, Steve Zaloga. These are the best names, writing in this stuff. So I'd say that, these were titles that you seem to think have been out forever. They've been updated. There's one of these ones, New Vanguard, they call them now. But David Fletcher on the Matilda one, they are great information, really good imagery, really good histories, and the best people writing in tanks, there. So I'd recommend those ones as well, that if you've got the chance from the shop. And I'll just, throw the ball again before he starts barking again. Just very quickly as well, looking at some of the other ones there, we've got this series, which if you're just interested in relatively shorter reads on some of the battles, these ones called Battle Stories. So there's First World War, Isandlwana, Alamein, Arnhem, all sorts of ones on that. So have a look at those as a series. I bought it again because I know, I keep promoting it. Tank Spotter's Guide, that's your one for a good end of the market in the sense of being able to learn those basics about all the different types of tanks. Again, written by David Fletcher there. And these were some of these books that our shop managers managed to get hold of. And if you are like me, a bit of a bibliophile, and you like your books and everything else, actually there's some real crackers in there at ridiculously cheap prices. So I'd strongly recommend have a look again. Commanders and Rangers on D-Day operations. Beautifully illustrated, lots and lots of stuff. You probably can't see a thing I'm showing you there, but really good thick stuff. And, published at 25 quid, and we've got them for under a £5. Agent Cicero, Hitler's most successful spy. Actually, he wasn't very successful, was he? Gallipoli Sniper, The Remarkable Life of Billy Singh. So again, First World War, if you're interested in First World War, there's another great one here, because he was at Gallipoli and Marine at Gallipoli. And again, these are really beautifully produced books, a lot of information in there. And again, I was just looking at, what's the one on that? $3.99, $2.99, Gallipoli Sniper. Escape from the Japanese, and again, have a look, because there's so many good titles here. Look at the reviews of them sometimes as well online, and they really are at that sort of price. It's worth taking the punt, I would argue, and having a go for getting some of those. So let's get back to some questions and back to throwing the dog for the ball. The ball for the dog, it's probably better, isn't it? There we go. Right. My mistake. You're absolutely right. Everyone's come straight back to me and made the point that actually the Enfield I was talking about, the hammerless, spurless one, was not, as I mentioned, 455. It's of course 0.38. So thank you for picking that one up. I should have done my homework and I should have got my one out of the attic. Anthony Sucker asked the question, did I work for Rusi? No, I didn't. John Jensen asked an interesting question, which I did try and have a look at. I won't guess, because actually I think someone out there will probably be able to come back. Panzer III, Panzer IV. Why are those little cutaways on the front of the turrets? What are they there for? That little angling, because is it a shot trap, or does it do something extra? Does it give it strength or whatever? So let's see what people who think they know the answer on that one do come back, and I'll tell you my thing on that next time maybe. Brian Flattery, have I said that right? Flaherty, sorry if I've said it wrong. He's got a 5 and 7 year old building Kobe tanks, and he's hoping to come over next year. So I mentioned that before about when you do build models, build Kobe tanks and everything else. And Ryan Fisher as well, he's been doing it with his daughter, building Kobe tanks. And I think she's only about 3. I come back to, I've said it earlier, one of the great things about model making, any sort of structural things that way, it gives you spatial awareness. You understand how things come together. You tend to remember about those things. It's just like, all the old blokes out there remember playing with Meccano and everything, how you built things up, how you could work out space, volume, weights, structures, stresses, all sorts of things you can pick up just from making sort of that type of models and different types and coming together and giving that enthusiasm for building things. I think it's really important. I was just really impressed there, really young age kids. So well done, the dads there in that case, and mums if you're out there doing it, which gives me the excuse to show here's a few other types of models if you're interested. We've got these ones that are done pressed out in wood. So it's printed out there. You press it out and there's a Sherman, there's a T-34 one, and there's a Tiger one. Again, something else that I know all us big boys would like to probably have a go and just sit there and glue them together or snap them together in the way they can be done. But also, I say that as well because, again, playing with and encouraging youngsters to make things and to put models together and everything else, that's a really great learning experience as well. And it would be great, of course, if you have to buy and do that learning experience from the Tank Museum. So there's some other ones there. Throw the ball again. Let's have a look. Let's keep going. Is it somebody, Shipman Mayhem, asked about could we recommend a history of armoured personnel carriers? Again, I had a look on my shelves and everything. The last proper, there's a couple of books that just do this is what's in service with the stats APCs, but the last one I could find with a proper history in was done by Chris Foss, who worked for Jane's and, doyen of keeping up to date with modern vehicles, etc., Chris Foss. But he wrote that back in 1989, and you can get it still, but I'd recommend that one as the book on history of APCs in one place, unless anyone, again, can say, listen, I've seen something better out there. But he's after the history, not just here's the specification book, which sometimes you can get those kind of ones that just sort of list what's in service where and what the details are. Daniel Friedman, nice little advert, thanks for buying. I'm just saying to him, first of all, but he also made the point, the prices, just about our shop again, are also the best I could find, and I looked around on the common sites like Amazon and Google, so there we go. So, thank you for coming back with that one. Just Ian asked, do the owners who bring their vehicles to tank sets get paid? No, we don't actually. We tend to pay the travel costs or the expenses of the low loader or something if that's required that way. And you can imagine there's some people out there would love to bring their vehicle to Tank Fest to show it off, so that's great for us. But on the whole, we know that one of the biggest things, and this is another thing, when people ask us about, why aren't we doing this, or can you take that there? Hiring a low loader costs you a lot of money. People, again, follow-up question, why don't we have our own low loader, get a tank transporter surely or something that way. Costs a huge amount of money to keep it plated, insured, all those things, keeping it up to date. And if we're honest, we're probably only, and we've done the maths a few times, even on a really busy year, it's still better for us to go to a commercial company that's insured, knows what they're doing. We particularly use a guy called Steve Cook a lot, lovely bloke, we've known him for ages, and basically if Steve says he can get it there or do it within, manoeuvre, Steve moves Concorde and everything else. So we tend to go to a commercial company because that works better for us. But on that question, actually we tend to pay the travel costs, but on the whole, no, we don't actually pay people money so they make a profit for coming to Tankfest. Right, where we got to. Steve Smith, who went away after we talked about, where's it gone? I've lost it. The 17-pounder shell was saying about the differences there. He reckons if you were to fill, so someone mentioned before, one of our inflatable 17-pounder rounds, armour-piercing ballistic cap rounds, full of water, that would be about 2/3 the weight of a real armour-piercing round of that type for the 17-pounder. With its cartridge there as well. So thank you for doing the math for us there. Somebody called Carlton has asked the question about, because I mentioned about running vehicles and not running vehicles, all those different things that go together. What entails when we put a vehicle to bed is a phrase I used, and what does that mean? And it's a tricky one because, like with the car industry, like with vintage vehicles, different people do different things. We're still working out what we can do with an armoured vehicle that might have run for a while. Now, if you know it's going to run again in, say, 6 months' time or a year's time, what different things would you do to it if the honest truth is that you then realise you're not going to run it for, say, 5 years or it's going to bed properly? So the obvious ones that we do to start with is things like remove batteries, because obviously if they leak, and batteries anyway are expensive, we need to keep them charged and use them again. So we remove batteries. What we're not so sure about now is with a classic car and everything, sometimes you can drain your fluids, you take the stuff out the radiator, or you put an inhibitor in place, because again, different corrosive levels there. Sometimes some people actually will drain a fuel tank, but most of us know that actually by keeping a fuel tank full tends to be better than empty. And again, if you're intending to run a vehicle in the future, you see some of these other things that you might want to drain then causes seals to crack and dry out. So you're going to have a bigger problem putting that vehicle back together again into a running order later. And the honest answer is we just don't have a straight, this is what we need to do yet. And one of the things over time we've been talking with other people in the heritage sector is, should we try and come up with, if you've only got 2 hours of staff time, because there's another big issue here, it's all very well coming up with great long lists of things you'd love to be able to do, have you got the time and the resources to do it? So there's no point coming up with ridiculous ideas that are unachievable by most museums. So we need to work out what are the cost, resource, intensive things, avoid them. What are the best things to be able to do to get the best return on your time and energy for looking after that vehicle in the longer term? And I think the problem we've got is every slight sector is doing slightly different things, because also they've got different resources and also different histories there. If you've had a major issue, you tend to learn that lesson quickly. One of our ones is, and again, another one of the issues that comes out time and time again is how are you recording what you're doing, so everybody who comes on afterwards, because I know in our past we've got too many vehicles that we're still trying to get it written down. Didn't something go wrong with that before it was put to bed? Back in, 1982, they thought this happened. And now we need to go back and work out, was that just anecdote? Is that really the case? Is there a major issue there? How do we record it? So we know what the problem is with that particular vehicle, which is another whole issue that museums going through, and why some of our videos we're making are probably going to be a better way of recording stuff than us trying to write things down, because we never quite get around to writing it down, do we? Or recording all the things in the way. We took hundreds of photographs, but anyone ever written up the full process of what went on that way? And that kind of touches on one of the other questions that someone asked. AIT asked the question, how long does a tank restoration take? How long's the length of string, depends what's wrong with that vehicle, all those different things. Look at the Matilda diaries, because that to me is a really good example there of a vehicle that we started the ball rolling thinking it needed just a bit of tinkering, ended up doing a major kind of restoration, almost, took it all apart, nuts and bolts bit. And you can look in there and see other vehicles, sometimes could you call a restoration just a lick of paint, because it doesn't need much more than that. So it's another impossible question to answer. But relating to the earlier one, do look at those programs, so things like the Matilda diaries and everything, because it gives you an idea of some of those, the range of the issues you have to face up to. And you've finally got this thing going. What if it's not going to run again? For how long? When do we do that oil change? When do you need to drain fluids? What are the things that are going to need some sort of maintenance, whether it's greasing, protective coatings, all sorts of things? How often are you going to do that? And you can see it's not a simple thing that we can give a yes or no simple answer to. Right, I think I'm nearly coming to the end of my ones. William Harvey asked, do we have plans for the an FT17? I don't think we do, but we do have the drawings from the original manual for the FT17. So all I'd say is have a word with us afterwards. And I know someone came along and copied our FT17 because they did a wonderful replica for the American Museum in Bath. So other people are out there making those sort of replicas as well. Another slurp of my tea before it gets too cold. Harpo Marx asked a question, keeps asking the question actually, about what happens with tanks in the wet. Do the crews, do they leak, etc. Depends on the generation. One of the points that was being made why welding was so good was it actually made tanks more waterproof than when they were riveted. If you look again at developments of tanks, there's things that are added to tanks, such as what they call rain shields, that are going over things like the optics, going around certain parts, because if you have water affecting your fighting ability, in other words, if it's dripping over the optics all the time, so that then distorts them, that's not going to be good. So if you look on the front of quite often, there's a little cowl over where the optics open. So you can see the design about, rain or water ingress is thought about. Look at a T54 with that splashboard over the front as well, for when it's wading. Are you finished, Finn, or not? No, then thank you. But modern tanks as well, really since the nuclear age, chemical NBC, etc., they have rubber seals on most of them. Some of the tanks the Tiger had, you could seal a Tiger, don't forget, because it was supposed to be used for deep wading. Never used in combat, never used on campaign, but it was designed for that. Huge amount of money, effort went into all that machining, those rubber seals. Rubber was quite hard to come by, all those things to make that vehicle so it could potentially deep wade with a snorkel. One of the things though, but you'll talk to soldiers all the time, actually most vehicles will get a lot of water inside. You open hatches, you have rain, you have stuff splashing around the place, all over the place. So the idea of the inside is like your car, nice, dry, warm and everything. Forget it. Water will be coming in. Hence they've got drain plugs to let that water out at accessible points in the floor. And another one to think about as well is when the guys are driving along, it might not be combat situations, most driving done with hatches open, etc., that water's coming in. And I remember fairly early when I started at the Tank Museum, we had an engineer along, and basically his requirement was to sit in just about every vehicle seat there was in the museum, driver's seats, all the different types of seats there, to see what seems like ergonomics of good design. And what were these things, like some of the, I remember the guys there, the wardens at the time, all ex-tank crew, were saying to him, which is, for goodness sake, just simple things. So if you've got some form of bucketed seat, water's going to come in, have a drain hole in the bottom of it, so every time that poor soldier had to sit back in that seat, he doesn't get a soggy backside every time he's doing that. So let the water either be able to drain away or have wipe clean surfaces, etc., etc., because water is going to ingress, it will always do that. You mentioned about barrels and things that way, what happens when you stop water running down a barrel. Tompion, that lovely word, a tompion, sometimes you can cover, sometimes I actually would put a temporary paper sticker or plug over the end of the barrel. Some they can fire through, a bit like those paper covers on Spitfire wings, etc. That just keeps muck and dust and other things out of that barrel. But again, that is part of the gunner and the tank crew's training, is they are, if you go over a bund or an object or something or other. That's why they put the gun to one side. You will be absolutely hammered if you get mud in the end of your barrel, because then that's a risk if you're going to fire. So these are things that they are aware of, like making sure that the next moment that vehicle, when they open the breech, it's not going to just suddenly floods out loads and loads of water down the barrel. But as I say, most modern vehicles now have some sort of rubber seals, but don't think that keeps you dry. You're not going to do it that way. Right. And I'll finish with Sam Reynolds. I'm just thinking the rain's about to start in a minute, so I've just got to keep an eye on everything. Sam Reynolds asked the question, what was the most common tank in Blitzkrieg for the Germans? Go back to my Aris talk, because we try and break that down, how when they were going into, depends what you call Blitzkrieg really, but 39 into Poland, how Germany was really not really that ready in terms of tanks in sizable numbers. Effective force still does its business that way. But if you go to May of 1940, I've got my stats in front of me here, which is what they wanted to be fighting with. Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs, May of 1940, 785 Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs, 290, Czech tanks they've taken into service, 35 and 38 Ts, 381 of those, but the Panzer I and Panzer IIs, which really added up, are the most numerous there. So you've got Panzer I's 523, Panzer II 955. So for one type, you could argue the Panzer II is the one there. But again, and they are seeing their action, Panzer IIs there as they're going around the place. But it's one of these, questions of, it's not the force, as I try to say in that Aris thing, that we think the German tank force is. In May of 1940, that is still not the force the Germans wanted in that sense. And the fact that they're being puffed up by 381, if you take out the Panzer I's and Panzer IIs, they do have a fighting ability, not denying that in any way, and they're equivalent on the... But when you tend to be doing that, what are we talking about in terms of if there was tank-on-tank engagement? What are the most effective tanks on the battlefield? Then you're really seeing Panzer IIIs, Panzer IV, and that being substituted by 381. Those Czech tanks make a real big difference there for the German forces. But go back to that Aris film we've done about the battle, and there's a big, I say big, but I go on a fair old time, as I normally do, telling you all about that German military that's there at that sort of time. Right, as the dog, no, he hasn't gone to sleep, still needs his thing. Yeah, talking of Finn, there was where was I was just looking. Somebody, here we go, Dylan Pierce out, I think in the States, said his German teacher's part of a collie rescue group in the States. And I always think that of, where you see these rescue centres and everything else, it's a complete misnomer. You go and rescue a dog. No, dogs rescue you. If you are a dog owner, it's the other way around all the time sort of thing. But thank you for the comment, and I hope she does well, looking after collies as well. Thank you for all the nice comments for Finn. Drop it. And all those suggestions, by the way, for Tank Museum, ball throws and everything, we're trying to look into those ones. And I think, now if you don't mind, if I could just finish off on a couple more things we've got in the shop. I mentioned about gin. Actually, I can't remember what the rules are, but anyway, this is a gin liqueur that we are allowed to sell from the shop, and 18% volume, and you can buy all your different flavour. That one's ginger, if you're so inclined, blackcurrant, raspberry and elderflower gin liqueurs there at 18% each. Somebody asked the question, we have RTR coasters, because they were a bit jealous of their fellow regiment had coasters them. We used to, but apparently we've sold out, so whether we'll get them again in the future. Meanwhile though, if you're after your coaster, put your mug on, my tea, you can buy your Panther one, you can buy your Sherman one, you can get a Tiger one, Tiger Collection one, King Tiger one, so go on the Elephant one, and pre-production King Tiger. So we do have coasters there if you don't mind putting up with those before you get your RTR ones. Drop. And what else were the other things? We were just saying that shop manager gave us, I know apparently somebody's almost like laughing when I was sort of trying to sell DVDs, as if, those old days, do you guys still like having cassette tapes or something? But again, I won't go into too much film reviewing, but we've got the Blu-ray there, £4.99. of Dunkirk. And if you haven't seen Dunkirk, you know, again, we can get into this debate about what do we think of it as a film and everything else. Christopher Nolan's, I loved it, and I'll tell you why I loved it. I think the aspiration to make war movies like that should be praised. You know, like I said last time, the more war movies that are made, it's better for our subject, better for our people, brings people to the subject, the topic and everything. And I think the aspiration, and when I went to see it, I always remember this thing, because we're in the cinema and there's a sweet old lady who was sitting a couple of down the road. And when finally the Spitfire manages to take out that Heinkel bomber before it drops its load on the ship, woof, she jumped out the seat screaming with joy, sort of thing. And I think any film that can get you into it that way, into that sort of sense, that was fantastic. So if you fancy the Blu-ray, we've got the Blu-ray of Dunkirk there, as the rain is starting to come down, so I better hurry up, speed up on the other one. Sorry, I know we always go on about, it always seems to be German stuff. Tiger Day t-shirt, there's another one of our Ranger t-shirts there. But for those of you who like the British stuff, when you are next in the kitchen, wouldn't you rather be doing your drying up with this fantastic Centurion with a drawing there that comes out of the stowage diagrams that we're doing there, so you can get your Centurion tea towel and the other ones as well that I always bang on about. Don't forget your calendar. You've always got the excuse for next year's calendar with all our lovely images there. They're all on the back. Lovely big images of tanks from the museum collection there. If you're getting bored as well, this was the other one. I was looking when you're sitting there trying to work out what to do. Reprints of old of the Second World War newspapers. So you've got there one from the Battle of Britain. We've got one, an Evening Standard there. What's that one for the reporting on the D-Day landings? And what's that? Daily Express for the beginning of the war. So if you fancy those replica ones there, or you know, you just want to put it to help make your diorama look good with that in the background or something else that way, you know, there's so many, be imaginative. Line your drawers. You know, people used to line drawers with paper and things. Line it with one of those and get everyone going, oh my goodness, this has been there a long time. I nearly put that in. I should have used that. That's my bookmark with our tanks on, so don't forget to get your bookmark with your Mark IV Sherman and a Tiger on. I will try and finish. I'm not going to finish up, am I? Still got more things to talk about. There's another one of those plush toys, I'm told, whatever a plush toy is, but there we are, a Sherman. And our key rings, as I know you've all got keys to look after. I Love Tanks key ring. And also these ones, which is our little statue. If you want our little statue that's out the front with the tank crew on, you can get one there, or I believe this one's like a fridge magnet. Am I right in saying that? I think it is, yeah. It looks like it's stuck on there somehow or other. But there you go, that's with that statue that you can see out the front. Yeah, the models, I was talking, one of the things that I know a lot of you out there, some of you model makers are watching this, some of you, like me, maybe it's a long time since you made a model, we've actually put together a kit. So a nice, on this case, here we go, we've got a Churchill there, but we've put if you are thinking of doing it, what do I need now and everything? So everything's in there, glue, paintbrushes, and the paints relevant for that particular vehicle, even what look like a set of toe clippers, but in fact they're for cutting the plastic off the sprue and everything. This took me back as well, because I always remember so in there's the brushes, big flat wide one. When I was a youngster, I remember reading in one of those modelling things about using a dry brush. I didn't really know what that meant. And I remember in Seaside Road in Eastbourne, there was this lovely little model shop, and I used to go in there with trepidation. Everything was way too expensive for me and everything. But I remember having the courage to ask a bloke there, who was an odd-looking guy, I remember, and actually coming up with thinking, okay, be brave, ask the question, what's a dry brush? And he showed me what a dry brush was and how you're supposed to use it, just taking it over highlights on surfaces. So if you've got a little bit of gunmetal paint, makes it look like the metal's coming through, you know, on the surface of a tank, you know, on the edges and the highlight points. Showed me all that, told me all those things. I remember walking out feeling like about, I don't know, 7 foot tall at the time, and I was only a little kid, because just by asking the questions you knew. And I know a lot of you model makers, one of the issues is, you know, where do you go to for those lovely old model shops that just seem to have closed down? You know, there's very few of them around with all the sorts of stuff and everything. So and I say that one as well, so if you're interested in getting into making a model, maybe go for one of those kits with everything in there. And if you are the model makers, thank you very much, because very kindly people have made the point that actually our shop, you know, we've got a nice selection of models in, and look out for our model show later in the year and that way. But there's some bits here that, again, if you're interested in, so these are all got the paints in for doing that sort of finishing on. So we've got tyres and track paint selection there. World War II Commonwealth Sherman tanks, the paints, the range in those ones there as well. This one, the German standard colours, so that, you know, you're asking before about RAL numbers and everything, that's all the RAL numbers ones in there for doing the models. What's this one? Basic pigmentation for aging vehicles as well, they've got there. And I just thought I'd say have a look at those, because online we've got some of those things that you used to get from, you know, the more detailed things from model shops, rather than just a one-off kit on its own. We've got all the paints and the more detailed stuff, so that's all the British 3945 European theatre of operation colours in there, so that they've got nice examples there. So again, if you are the model maker, and I brought them out again just because, well, you know, what person shouldn't have a set of Tank Museum tank socks? So get those ones. So I've done the hard sell all over again. I hope it hasn't bored you too much. As I said before, keep the questions coming. Finn is still here. I don't know if he's been in shot at all, but I hope, you know, he sends his regards as well, the dog. And the other one, I know a number of you have asked, so what's happening, you know, when are we opening and everything? We still can't say a certain date. Look on our website. We are gearing up for that. A lot of things going on. But as you all know, the rules of the game are changing all the time. That's going to affect us in, you know, spacing, expectations, etc. But we are really hoping that it won't be that many weeks before we are going to be able to open. And meanwhile, we'll be carrying on doing things. So look on our website, because we've got some exciting news about some other things we're doing to try and just make sure that we're keeping in touch with you all and showing you some interesting and new things. And if you have bought stuff from us, thank you for supporting the museum. If you fancy any of this stuff here, or go and look on the website where all the prices are and how you do it. We've been having a good old go at the postage again, so or if there was something earlier you were looking at, went out of stock, have a look, it might be back in. So that helps support us, and thank you if you've been doing that. And I'll come to the end and finally shut up. Thank you. We are a charity here at the Tank Museum, so if you can support us, please do. Consider joining our Patreon scheme or becoming a member of the Friends. Any donations will go directly towards the Tank Museum and its activities.